Mother's Day is a special day where we get to pause for a moment and thank those of you that either have given birth to children or have stepped into that role of mothering. As Sue, what did Sue talk to us about last week? And now the word is steadfastness. Thank you. There's got to be steadfastness in being a mother, right? And even in this series that we're working with, Dr. George says, seeing these kids through to their 18th birthday, which is 14 years, takes a lot of effort. And so this is a day where we thank you, moms, for that. And thank you for your contribution to humanity. Because without you, we would be a dying humanity. My mother this week sent me a compilation of funny stories that moms were able to tell on their children, and one of them seemed particularly appropriate for today. It seems that a mom was running an errand in the evening on a summer's night, so it was nice and warm, with her 3 young kids. And they pulled up to a stoplight just behind a convertible. Top was down on the convertible, and all of a sudden the driver of the convertible jumps up in her seat, turns around, and starts waving at them. She's stark naked. The woman is in so much shock, she can't even say anything, right? She's grappling, so much going through her mind, when one of her kids, a 5-year-old boy, says, "Mommy, that woman is not wearing her seatbelt." It really demonstrates for me how programmed we are by the environment that we live in and by our culture. You know, for the woman, she's had, I don't know how old this mother was, but she's had years and years of programming from the culture at large, from her family, and it becomes layers and layers of belief that can cause us to really shut down in the moment. I mean, she was in shock, right? And worried about, what do I say to my children? What do I do here? And even the little 5-year-old who's had much less time to be programmed, he's programmed, right? Now, his programming, and if you read about children development, their programming tends to be directly about things they have to address in their life, like the functioning of their life. So you can imagine the number of times that little boy was told, now make sure you wear your seatbelt. So to him, it didn't matter that the woman was naked. It was, she's not wearing her seatbelt. We are doing a 4-part series. This is our second week, a 4-part series on the Netflix series called Daughters of Destiny. It's about the Shanti Bhavan. What do we call it? It's a school. It's a, say it again. It's a residential school, that's right. It's where the kids come at age 4 and they go all the way through high school, and then the school puts them on through college. Now, these kids are from the poorest of the poor, the lowest sect in India. Their parents make on an average $2 a day. And some of them don't come from families with 2 working parents. And so what they are offered in this school is beyond what they could ever be offered in their lifetime with their parents. And yet, we see in this episode that they struggle. They struggle with receiving. They struggle with going home and feeling like they're outcasts. They struggle with the way that some of their family members are envious of them. They struggle with the fact that their family still wants them to conform to the culture of the times. And it really highlights culture. We don't talk much about culture, and yet we all were raised in culture. We may not have been raised in as rigid of a culture as we find in India, but at the same time, we can't escape culture. And culture becomes the unspoken law. This is the really interesting thing. I've been doing quite a bit of reading about culture, and a gentleman by the name of Eugene Ehrlich, who was a gentleman that studied the philosophy of law and taught that. And he was writing in the 1930s. He wrote, "Culture is a living experience in the sense that it is the source of living law, the law which dominates life itself, even though it has not been posited on legal propositions or in legal propositions." And here's what I think is interesting. The law which dominates life itself. Here where we're studying spirituality, we would tell you to let spirit be the law that dominates your life, right? But culture does not see it that way. And culture often forms a container of which we are exposed to life. So, for example, I was raised in a very entrepreneurial family. And while we respected the arts, for example, you were always told, well, you're not going to want to go into the arts because you'll never make any money. And so what happens is we're closed off. And the culture can be quite mean. I appreciated when you talked, Seth, or saying about how mean people can be. Our meanness often comes out of this need to have people conform to the culture. I got called into ministry, which I consider to be a small miracle, maybe a large miracle, because from the culture that I came from, it never even crossed my mind to be a minister. Never. I can't even imagine how it would have. But this is the beauty of why we talk to you about doing your spiritual practice. Virtually every spiritual practice is creating room in our consciousness for spirit, a quiet, still place where we can hear the guidance and begin to trust the guidance as we see that in retrospect, the guidance really has never led us wrong. And so I got called into ministry, and I had an immediate recognition, oh, this is scary. One of the very first things I said to myself, well, I won't make any money. My culture again, right? But after I had done my prerequisites and been accepted in ministerial school, I started telling people what I was going to do. And I told my grandmother, who was the matriarch of the family. She didn't miss a beat. So you're just going to waste that good education. Do you see? Demanding conformity. Generations of an entrepreneurship, and then I become a minister. And for my entire rest of my time with her, she never would introduce me as a minister. Have you met my grandson, Scott? He's a CPA. Well, I used to be. Maybe once a CPA, always see a CPA, but really there is it becomes, just as Eugene said, the law which dominates life. And if we don't conform to it, it can be really dangerous. We see in this episode how one of the young girls has a male friend. Now, of course, at Shanti Bhavan, that's fine. And they're actually told to speak up. They're told to speak their mind. All these things are against the culture. So even though her family would never really allow her to hang out with a young man, she goes on walks with this guy. And then some people in the neighborhood report her to her parents. And suddenly she feels ashamed. She feels judged. Her parents move them. Can you imagine? Just because she went for a walk with a boy, they uproot them and move to a different community. I mean, there is huge incentive not to change. You know, we talk about the fact that the inertia in culture is wild, and inertia is to remain unchanged. Now, you can say, but look at today. We have all these companies that their culture has changed. But what's interesting, even in a culture of change, they can't change it. Because sometimes change is not the best thing. Sometimes to stay stable for a while is fine, but you'll read companies that have got such a culture of change, they don't know what it means not to constantly be changing. It's the inertia that begins to happen. It's so hard to change culture. Why do I bring this up? In the unity that I grew up in, we made it sound so easy. Just identify your limiting beliefs and let them go. But what we didn't understand, and what we're coming to understand more and more in unity, is that especially if it's something that's enculturated into us, it is a big deal. You know, Sue mentioned last week about how hard it is to change obesity, both for men and women. I would love to know the culture that those people were raised in. Because you see, we want to be accepted deeply, and it's Mother's Day, and whether we get along with our mother or not, we have a deep connection with our mothers. And so we want to belong. We don't want to be the one that's the outcast, unless we're willing to bring consciousness to it. And you may be sitting there going, well, yeah, but I'm not a young boy or a young girl anymore. I've been able to push through those cultural norms around sexuality or sexual identification or race or whatever. But you see, and I know I use this term a lot, but it's subtle. It can be very subtle. Like, I am just a few years from retiring. I'm in my 60s. And I'm really looking forward to not having such structured days, to not having so much responsibility. I can feel deep in my soul, you know, like, do you ever feel things at depth where you go, yeah, I'm going to be one of those people that at least for a year is going to be fine not having a lot to do. After that, who knows? But I can just feel it in my bones. And yet, that's not the only message that goes on. You know, in this episode, they talk about they feel like they are being asked to live in two worlds. Well, I know that feeling just even from this last experience, that there's a part of me that's very uncomfortable with me not doing in a way that contributes. Maybe that's the word that we would use. So at first I was sort of surprised, but I've come to understand, of course the universe is throwing this up in my face right now. You know, here I am, I'm about 2.5 years from retiring, and I'm getting all these invitations to be speaking, to be teaching, and not just one Sunday or something, but well past my retirement, to take on responsibility. And what's fascinating, or sit on boards, you know, please, you know, share your wisdom. Well, ask my congregation, I'm sure they would think there's not much wisdom here. But to the outside, you know, and inevitably what comes up in me is, wow, this is kind of a once-in-a-lifetime offer. This is a big deal that I've been offered this. And I struggle. And I have accepted some of them, and I regret it because it's going against what's true for me. So I've been wondering, why this conflict? I've put in lots of years of doing. What's the conflict? And so I've been inquiring about it, been going through the RAIN process. And just in the last couple of weeks, I realized, at first I thought it was value. I won't have any value if I'm not doing, right? But it struck me just in the last couple of weeks. It's really, what is the word that I came up with? It's about existing. That I won't exist. And I thought, where does that come from? And then it struck me as I started immersing myself in this talk on culture, that I come from a culture that my interpretation was it was through doing that I was acknowledged, that I got mirrored, that I got loving comments brought my way, that there was appreciation of what I did, that I felt like I was something, that I existed. And until I became conscious of that, I was in a major struggle. Like, I was very uncomfortable not saying yes to all these opportunities that are coming my way. But interestingly, when I became aware that it was existence and was able to reality check the fact that, no, I exist. I don't have to do anything. I exist, and I have value in that existing, as do all of us. We all are pieces of the fabric of humanity. And each of us is essential to come forth with our uniqueness in order for us to be bringing the light, in order for us to be bringing forward movement to humanity. We exist. And in that, bringing awareness of my cultural influence, I suddenly felt so much freer and realized it's an illusion that this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The universe is always unfolding possibility for us. The universe is always unfolding resistance to the possibility. But it's important not to have that external influence become the God that we follow. We want to align with what's true for us. That is what's nurturing in life. That's what allows us to move forward with a sense of vibrancy and aliveness for our life, to enjoy our life, to when we lay down on our deathbed to go, yes, it was a good experience. And it's never too late. And so, as we are, I guess one thing that would be good is just to pause now and to reflect on the culture that you were raised with, the culture of the society, the culture of your family, the culture of the church or spiritual organization that you were a part of, the culture of other activities that your family was involved in or that you were involved in, and how they've molded you, how they've left their impact. Isn't it funny that my grandmother has been dead for probably 20 years? Well, she lives well in me, doesn't she? She's alive in me. But when we're willing to get down to the felt sense, that's the key. Not just to know your culture, oh yeah, my family did this and this, but when you don't follow that, what is the felt sense? For me, it was, I don't exist. What is it for you? And maybe the truth is that there's nothing really going on in your life that challenges that right now. But when you are challenged, when Spirit invites you into something that is just out of context with the cultures, and I should use the word cultures, shouldn't I? The cultures that you were raised with, what does the thought of not aligning with that bring up in you? For you see, Spirit is the one law. I know that to some of you are saying, no, that's not true. Money is the one law, or relationship is the one law, or my career is the one law. No, Spirit is the one law. And when we're willing to trust Spirit, when we do our spiritual practice and make room for Spirit, and we're willing to really check into, and what is my hesitancy, then we're free. And there's nothing better. Now, I should probably come back about 8 months into my retirement, shouldn't I? Oh, let me just tell you another fun story. So my brother was fortunate enough to retire 10 years ago. And, like me, he was so excited about it, but he doesn't really have any spiritual support. Doesn't have a spiritual practice, doesn't have the kind of spiritual support that we have in this community. And amazingly, within a couple of months, he slipped into a major depression. You see, he was up against the culture of our family. And thankfully, he got himself into therapy and came to understand that. I have a father that is almost 90 years old, and he works every day. And we say to him, we could really help care for you a lot easier if you would give up your work. And he looks at us like we're crazy. But see, he was the son of the matriarch. And for her, it was what you did that got you the love, that got you the acknowledgement. And so my siblings will express, just last week we had a family meeting, my siblings were expressing frustration, and I had great compassion. And a great deal of gratitude that I was not the first generation, but the second, where there was some space for me to break with culture and to still be loved, and to find myself in something beyond what my family said was right and wrong. Something beyond what the culture said, coming out as a gay man. Something beyond what the culture said was right and wrong was actually beautiful for me. And so I invite you to bring culture into the conversation, to not disregard it, to not, we have a consultant in Unity named Tony Boehm who says, culture eats strategy for lunch. And you see, isn't most of when we're talking about launching out into something new, we strategize about it, right? Well, if you're not bringing culture into the conversation, it's why we fail. It's why we give up. When the resistance from the culture says, no, you can't do that, or you shouldn't do that, or you're bad for doing that, then our own insecurities, our own judgments come up. It's not easy. So bring culture into the conversation. Be willing to look at, why am I uncomfortable with the great opportunities the universe is offering me now? So let's move into some meditation, shall we? Again,